Welcome back to Tales of Knights and Magic. Subscribe if you like, and now get comfortable and enjoy this glimpse into the world of fantasy. The ledger was found wrapped in oilcloth and bone thread, tucked inside the ribcage of a corpse that had long since become part of the dust. It wasn't hidden in a crypt or buried in a sanctified ruin. It lay in a dried-out field of plagueweeds outside a collapsed barn no one remembered building. The man who found it wasn't searching for anything valuable. He was tallying livestock loss for a landowner too drunk to walk the perimeter himself. His name was Thun. He didn't wear armor, didn't cast spells, didn't believe in gods. He kept numbers, calculated loss, balanced profit sheets, quiet work. Work no one noticed until it began to change the world. Thane carried the ledger home without knowing what it was. It was heavier than it should have been. Not in mass, but in presence. It pulled at his palm when he held it, like gravity made person. When he opened it, nothing moved. No flames, no whispering, just page after page of names, dates and symbols in ink so black it looked fresh. He sat at his desk, scratched his beard and read. The first entry dated back 413 years. A noble, a title, an amount owed. The second was a merchant. The third a priest. He flipped through faster, thousands of names. Some scratched out, others circled in red. A few stamped with sigils he didn't recognize, each one followed by a description. One life given for wealth. 3 years bargained for success. Soul withheld, interest accrued. He flipped back to the beginning. In the inside cover, written in a tighter hand, one line, debts unpaid will be balanced by force. He shut the book, sat in silence, fought the candle, flickered once. The air in the room didn't change, the shadows didn't shift, and yet something had altered. He felt it, not like fear, like alignment. The ledger didn't demand anything. It waited. Thane had never used magic, but he knew how to count, knew how to cross-check. He opened his own small account book, flipped to a page he had written on a month prior. Inventory from a small shop north of the border. A man named Velrech. Thane had helped him hide a smuggling transaction by adjusting the ledgers. He didn't think much of it. When he checked the demonic ledger, Velrech's name was there, dated 1 year earlier. One promise broken, eternal fidelity in exchange for untraceable profits. Thane's fingers curled. He turned to the last page of the demonic ledger, blank. He took a quill, dipped it in ink, wrote the name Velrech under a new heading. Below it, he wrote, debt collected by proxy. The moment the quill left the page, the ink burned red, only for a second. Then it turned black again. Thane blinked. The room smelled faintly of sulfur. He waited. Nothing happened. The next day, news reached him that Velrech's shop had burned down. Not the whole building, just the back room, the hidden one, where the smuggled goods were kept. Velrech himself had disappeared. No trace. The locals assumed he fled to avoid taxes. Thane knew better. He did not panic. He documented. A week later, he found a second name in the ledger, one he recognized from a decade prior. Marwyn Belt, a debt collector who used illegal bind sigils on farmers and passed their land deeds to a noble who'd paid for discretion. Thane had written the ledgers that hid the loss. He'd always regretted that one. He checked the demonic ledger. Marwyn's name was underlined in gold. One family, 7 lifespans, souls encumbered. The debt hadn't been collected. Thane turned to the final page, wrote Marwyn's name. Under it, balance recalculate. That night, Marwyn Belt was seen in 3 places at once, muttering to himself, clawing at his skin, then collapsing in the middle of a crowded drinking hall. His body melted into ash. No one could explain it. Thane stayed quiet. The ledger responded not to blood or chant, but to accounting. If he phrased the entries with clarity, the ledger acted. Not immediately, but inevitably. He began to cross-reference. Not all debts were evil. Some were merely broken. A soldier who swore never to raise his sword for coin again, recorded in the ledger as having sold that vow for a single year of victory. A midwife who promised never to let a child die in her arms, broken for the chance to cure her own disease. Thane did not judge. He calculated. If a debt created imbalance and the world tilted from it, he recorded the correction. Some were simple. A scribe who had stolen names from temple records. A courier who delivered death under false orders. He wrote their names. The ledger reacted. He didn't ask how, he began to test the edge. He wrote a name followed by a partial entry. No judgment, no action. The ledger did nothing. He wrote a name with no history, no change. But when he wrote a name with intent to balance, not punish, not reward but restore, the page lit, the text embedded, and reality shifted. No one saw him work. He didn't change his routine. Still did numbers. Still kept books. But people started treating him differently. Not with fear, with caution. The way animals avoid the scent of a predator that hasn't hunted yet. He traveled once, just once, to a town where the ledger named 7 deaths centered on a single well. The well had been blessed in blood, cursed by mistake, and used to trade 7 promises over the course of 50 years. He stood by it, opened the ledger, wrote a symbol in the margin. The next morning, the well collapsed in on itself. Water still flowed, but no one could draw it. The townspeople dug a new one, 10 feet east. No one questioned it. The ledger grew heavier with each entry, not in weight, in presence. It started humming faintly at night, not a sound, a resonance. He started having dreams, not visions, memories. Some were his, some were not. A woman praying in a dialect he didn't know. A man stabbing a beast in a forest made of mirrors. A child handing over a tooth in exchange for her mother's voice. He didn't write those names. He wrote the ledger. A stranger approached him in the market one morning. Hooded, hands gloved, teeth filed to points, asked, "Who lets you touch it?" Thane didn't answer. The stranger blinked, nodded, and said, "If it speaks back, run," then vanished. The next day the ledger changed. A new section appeared. Not written, implied, between pages, a negative space. When he stared at it too long, he began to smell iron. He tested it, wrote a name within that space. The ink vanished. 3 days later the name reappeared, crossed out in white. The person it belonged to had vanished from every record, every memory, every trace. The name existed, but nothing else. Thane didn't write in that space again. He began organizing the debts by category. Vows broken, promises sold, truths exchanged. He began balancing clusters. He found patterns. Debts carried forward across generations. Names linked by hidden lineages. Certain bloodlines were burdened so deeply that each new child was born with a weight not their own. He tried balancing them. The results varied. Some families healed. Others died out completely. He wrote nothing on his own name. The ledger did not mention him. That unsettled him more than if it had. One night he found a page filled with spirals. He hadn't written them. The ink was blue-black, sharp. The spirals spun inward, not out. He touched one. He forgot a word, a simple one. Couldn't remember it all night. Woke up and it came back, but the ledger had flipped itself to a new page. Blank, waiting. He didn't write that day, but he checked every page. It was tracking him now, not by judgment, by inclusion. He wrote a final entry before sleeping, a name he'd feared writing since the beginning. The King. No reason, no debt listed, just a name. The ink stayed dark, unreactive, until morning. Then the ink pulsed red, not burned, not flared, pulsed. The palace bell rang thrice. An assassin had tried to kill the king in his sleep. Failed. The king's guard executed 20 suspects. The noble houses panicked. Thane sat at his desk and whispered, "That wasn't me." The ledger hummed. He understood. Not every balance required permission, only recognition. He opened to a new page, picked up the quill, and began to reorganize. Thane did not speak to anyone for 6 days after the pulse. He did not step outside, did not light candles after dusk, did not eat anything not sealed and dated by his own hand. The ledger sat on the desk as it always did, closed, quiet, humming only when his fingertips hovered too long above the leather. Something had changed. Not in the book, in him. It wasn't fear. He had felt that before during border audits when noble retinues stared too long, or when a guard noticed the weight of a second ledger tucked into his pack. This was deeper, stranger, a sensation of being part of something without being invited. When he had written the king's name, the world hadn't responded with force. It had responded with interpretation. Someone, something had acted on the balance without him. That meant the ledger was no longer passive. It had discretion, or maybe it always had. Maybe he had just reached the depth where it could afford to stop pretending. On the 7th morning, he wrote no names. He read from the first page again, slower this time, noticing things he hadn't before. Patterns in ink density, phrasing anomalies in the debt description. Some entries had margins filled with microscopic symbols that danced when he stared too long. Others were sterile, cold, precise, military contracts, assassinations, trade wars. He noticed that the oldest entries, the ones closer to the ledger's origin, were more poetic. 1 rose given for a kingdom of ash. 2 breaths stolen for a winter that never came. They weren't literal, or maybe they were. Once, reality was flexible. After all, if someone paid enough, and what they paid with was not always coin or blood. Sometimes it was the right to remember. Farin closed the book, left his room, walked through the streets of Dustmere with a new stillness in his step. People noticed. The baker who usually offered him day-old crusts didn't call out. The courier boy who always ran too fast gave him even the mongrel dogs stopped at corners and didn't follow. He visited the archives, not the official ones, but the private records maintained by the Eastern Guild of Bond Scribes. They kept death logs, business inheritances, and notarized confession. Fawn paid with a silver coin, not his own, but stamped with the crest of a merchant family he knew had vanished a year ago. The clerk accepted it without question. He asked for 3 names. 2 were known. One was the first Kelverin, a sword for hire who broke a blood oath in a duel and paid a necromancer to erase the memory from his opponent's corpse. The second, Lessanonian, a noble's concubine, who sold her laughter to a demon for eternal youth, then sued the demon when the laughter kept echoing in her estate's halls. The third name was scribbled, partial and complete. SS. No full name, no date. The only note was, did not pay. Fawn copied the entries and left. Back in his room, he wrote the first name into the ledger. Calverin, no judgment, just notation. The page shimmered, except 3 days later, a rumor spread through the guild halls. Calverin had gone mad, killed 2 clients, then tried to write a confession in his own blood using a knife, too dull to cut. He bled out. Fawn did not flinch. He wrote the second name, Lessanonian. This time, he added, debt unpaid, laughter misused. The ink turned violet, then black. That night, she vanished. Her estate remained intact. Her servants claimed she had walked into her own mirror and never come out. The halls fell silent. He hesitated before writing the third name. SS. The ledger accepted it. The page rippled like disturbed water. No action followed. No change. He did not sleep that night. At dawn, the page was blank. He asked no questions. Instead, he visited the city's lower courts, sat in on petty trials, listened, not for justice, for indelible. A man fined for stealing bread while a merchant walked free after collapsing a roof that killed 3. A child blamed for a stolen ring when no one had looked at the lordling, who owned 10. He recorded no names. He went home and wrote one phrase, this district owes more than it admits. The ledger bled ink. Pages turned themselves. 5 entries disappeared. Others reordered. A map formed, not of the city, of its weight. He followed it. That night, he walked into the warehouse district, found a building marked for demolition, entered without light, waited. Within an hour, men arrived. Contractors for the demolition, not to work, to meet. One handed the other a bag. Not coin, bones, labeled, categorized, remnants of a bloodline wiped from the city's census rolls a decade ago. Evidence. The transaction was not financial, it was archival. Fenon stepped forward, said one word, unpaid. The men didn't hear him, but they stopped moving. One dropped the bag, the other screamed, not in pain, confusion. He began reciting names he should not have known. A flood of genealogy spilled from his mouth until he collapsed, choking on syllables. Fenon left. Did not report it, did not write it down. The ledger had recorded. He began dreaming of corridors, endless, stacked, with versions of himself. Some older, some younger, all holding ledgers, all writing, none speaking. When he woke, he began categorizing the debts differently, not by name, not by crime, by echo. Which debts created new ones, which rippled outward. One name kept recurring, a merchant called Enwar Dell. Minor figure, managed spice routes. But his name was stamped across 38 entries, not as debtor, as recipient. He had collected others' payments, absorbed their burden. Fen checked public records. Enwar was dead, been dead for 9 years. His house was sold, his land given to the crown. But his ledger thread was active. That meant someone had taken his name. Fen didn't write it yet. He waited, watched, tracked the flow of money across the western ports. Found 4 identical signatures in different cities, all tied to trade under Enwar Dell's network. That was impossible. He wrote the name, added the note, false presence. Debt multiplied. The ledger resisted. Pages refused to turn. Then the book shuddered, accepted. 3 days later, every warehouse bearing that name burned simultaneously across 4 cities. No cause found. No survivors. Fen understood now. Fen understood now. The ledger did not simply balance. It sought stasis. Where the world overreached, it cut. Where it frayed, it rewove. He was not its master. He was its accountant. And now the ledger had begun anticipating his queries. Pages opened to relevant names before he touched them. Corrections appeared in margins he hadn't written. One note simply read, "This debt will return." He began to wonder what kind of entity the ledger had once belonged to. Not a demon. Not exactly, demons made deals for gain. This was maintenance. Punishment only when necessary. Reward only when the scale tipped too far. He opened the first page again, found a new line written beneath the original warning. It said, "One day you will write your own name, and it will balance everything." He stared at it for hours. Didn't blink. When he finally closed the book, he whispered, "Not yet." The ledger did not hum. It listened. And that, more than anything else, made him understand that he was no longer just an agent of balance. He was becoming its shape. Finn left Dustmere before the sun rose. No fanfare, no announcement, no packed belongings. He carried only the ledger, wrapped in thick canvas and bound to his back with corded straps dyed the color of dried blood. He wore no coat, despite the cold. His breath fogged in the air like warnings, each exhale met by silence from the road ahead. The decision hadn't been made consciously. It had been accumulating for days. Every tremor in the ledger, every name that appeared without his inquiry, every correction that occurred faster than he could document. Dustmere was no longer a place to observe. It was a place already reacting, and Thane had learned to leave cities when they started to think in his cadence. Rel, the next town north, was smaller, poorer, unremarkable on most maps. It had a single trade route, 2 inns, 1 abandoned watchtower, and a temple no longer staffed by clergy. But it had record, and it had debts. Thane arrived before dusk, took a corner room in the quieter inn, and paid with a coin that bore no stamp but was accepted anyway. That was another change he'd noticed lately. Currency obeyed him now, not visibly. Not absolute, but enough that people accepted whatever he handed over and never checked twice. He unpacked slowly, set the ledger down on the desk, didn't open it yet. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the town, counting steps, noting distances between buildings, observing how people avoided the shadows even when nothing moved in them. The temple caught his eye first. Not because it was defiled or desecrated, but because it was intact, too intact. The columns were clean, the windows unbroken, the doors still blessed with the old sigils. No one had dared reclaim it. That meant fear, not of gods, of something that had once replaced them. He entered. The air inside was stale, sealed too long. Dust hung like memories in the stillness. The altar remained, untouched. On it lay a cracked plate of glass, the kind used for scrying by mid-level clerics. Thane approached it, lifted it. Beneath, scratched into the stone in dull metal, were 6 names. 5 crossed out, 1 circled. He memorized it, left, returned to the room, opened the ledger, wrote the name Saren Helb. The ink turned amber. He had never seen that color before. The page trembled, the ledger flipped 3 sections forward, opened on a page with a pre-written heading. Colossal debt partitioned below, Saren Helb's name repeated 17 times, each tied to a different date, a different pact, a different region, every one unresolved. Thane stared. This wasn't a man. This was a node, someone whose choices affected entire structures. Not a king, not a general, just a man who had touched enough events that his name bent the world's tension like a keystone. Thane didn't act. He waited. The ledger acted first. The pages darkened at the edges. Ink spread without his hand. New names appeared, some familiar, some not. He recognized one, a noblewoman from Belmore, long thought dead. Another, a merchant he'd helped vanish during the 3rd phase of the Dustmere corrections. All connected to Saren Helb. The room grew colder, the glass of his window fogged from the outside. He stood, reached for his coat, stopped. The ledger turned again, showed a different page, blank, except for one phrase, proxy required. He wrote, name. The ink responded instantly, yours. He paused, looked at the room around him, thought of Dustmere, the spiral and the bell tower. The child in Nareth named after a shape, the merchant who vanished when his soul debt was mistaken for someone else's. He wrote, not yet. The ink faded, accepted, balance could wait. Instead, he searched. The next morning, he walked to the town records. They were kept in a wooden building beside the mayor's home, staffed by a single clerk who claimed to be descended from scribes of the First Age. Thane asked for tax lists, marriage bonds, debt transfers, paid again with unmarked coin. Received no resist. He spent the day cross-referencing names, looking for echoes. He found 6. Each person in the town had at least one connection to Saren Helb's web, some directly descendants, others indirectly beneficiaries of actions he had caused. He returned to the ledger. 1 sentence. Helb's debt lives in Rel. The ledger responded not with a tremor, but a pressure. The candle on his desk bent its flame toward the page. The glass from the temple shattered in his mind. Not real, but real enough. He opened a new section in the ledger, began cataloging distributed debt. The kind that could not be paid by one, only by many. It made sense. Why did kingdoms fall when kings died? Why did wars continue after the generals were buried? Because debt was never held by the powerful alone. It spread, grew mold on the foundation of obedience. Thane wrote new equations, developed ratios, began calculating how much influence a name had based not on their power but on how many people bore the consequences of their choices. Held's number was the highest so far, but not the peak. The ledger hinted at higher ones. Blank pages with labels: Echo, King, Forgotten Child, Nameless Empire. He left them alone, for now. Instead he made contact, spoke to one of the Hell-blanked villagers, a boy named Marith. 14, no parent, lived with an aunt who smelled of burned copper and never looked at Thane's face. The boy spoke little, but when Thane mentioned the name Held, he blinked. Asked, "Do I owe?" Thane didn't answer. He watched. 3 nights later, Marith disappeared, left behind a small pile of river turns stacked in a spiral. The town did not notice. The ledger recorded it. Thane opened the book, wrote, "1 removed debt reduced." The ledger replied, "No." Shifted. He followed the trail the debt had moved into the aunt. She began forgetting days, people, herself. Thane watched her speak to the empty air, hold conversations with walls. He didn't interfere, he calculated. One person's burden did not simply vanish, it displaced. Like water. The city would eventually drown if it could not evaporate. He prepared the next phase, built a new entry in the ledger, distributed offset mechanism, created space for names to balance each other, not through death, through recognition. He called it the ledger mirror, wrote 2 names, balanced their entries, waited. Both people developed headaches for 3 days, then began finishing each other's sentences, claimed to dream the same dream. Thane did not stop it. Balance was ugly, but it worked. He began writing in the margins, theories, tests, notations. The ledger began responding in the same space, like it was listening, learning, collaborating. He stopped thinking of it as a book, started thinking of it as a counterpart, or maybe something closer. He still hadn't written his name, but some nights he caught himself scribbling the first letter, then burning the page. Every time, the ledger was open when he returned, waiting, not asking, just remembering. By the time Thane left Rel, there were no names left in the village that the ledger hadn't touched. He didn't need to write them all. Some were corrected through association, others by proximity to someone already adjusted. He'd begun to understand that the ledger had its own method of propagation. When he wrote one name clearly, the rest of the web unfolded through inference. What it needed from him wasn't volume, it was intent. The clarity of what he wanted fixed determined how far the ripple reached. Rel no longer felt like a place, it felt like an answered equation, balanced, but hollow. He didn't stay longer than he needed to. He walked east. The next element, small and unnamed on his map, was a roadside trading cluster strung together by tarpaulin tents, 2 stone wells and a single ward station run by a woman who changed her name every week. Thane didn't ask her name. He paid for 3 nights and a bucket of clean water. She accepted the coin without looking at it. When he asked about local history, she stared through him and said, "We don't keep stories here, only prices." That told him more than a ledger of documents ever could. This was a place built to forget, which meant something had happened here worth remembering. He sat in a tent tavern that evening, drinking boiled root tea and watching people. He heard 6 languages spoken, none of them clearly. He saw 3 merchant signs on one cart, a blend of symbols that couldn't coexist legally in any kingdom. Smugglers, exiles, fortune sellers, discarders. Every face wore the same expression, one that knew better than to ask questions. That kind of silence wasn't fear, it was design, a place engineered to avoid the past. He opened the ledger on his lap, covered in cloth, its spine facing away from the firelight. He didn't write a name, he just watched, listened, smelled the air, salt and soot, fish and rotting parchment. Something about this place itched. Not the skin, the mind. The way memory tried to catch on certain details, and slid off. He closed the ledger, left the tent, walked to the edge of the camp. There was a stone outcropping there barely taller than a man. Most passed it without thought, but Thane approached, ran his hand across its surface, smoothed by weather, almost too smooth. Not natural erosion. Erasure, the kind that came with ritual. He knelt, cleared dust, found faint scratches. A spiral, incomplete, broken at the midpoint. Someone had tried to draw it and stopped, or been stopped. He opened the ledger again, wrote, "Spiral, half drawn, location, camp east of Rel." The ink glowed blue, not red, not black. Blue was new. It pulsed once, then the page turned by itself. A map appeared, not drawn, shaped. A radius formed. 10 miles, 3 marked locations. One at the center. No labels, No names, only points of weight. He stood, left the stone, followed the path to the nearest point. It took him into a marsh grove where the air vibrated faintly. He passed a standing stone carved with weathered runes, not language. Warning. He knelt beside a pool of black water, wrote nothing, waited. A bird landed nearby, did not sing, stared at him with a human eye. He stared back, said one word, balance. The bird did not flee, it dipped its head, then flew. The pool rippled. He dropped a pebble in, the ripples came back wrong. Faster on one side, slower on the other. Imbalance. He wrote, center misaligned, proximity event. The ledger responded with a word he didn't write. Split. He moved to second point, found nothing but a burned tree ringed by stakes. Each stake held a strip of leather with words scrawled in flake ink. Do not return, leave the debt. It was paid, it was paid, it was paid, it was paid. The repetition wasn't desperation, it was denial. He gathered 3 strips, pressed them between the pages. The ledger didn't consume them, it accepted them. He felt the weight shift. The third point was beneath a collapsed watch post. Nothing stood but the metal bolt that once anchored the tower frame. He brushed it, saw a flash, not a memory, not his own, a man kneeling, ledger in hand, writing a name and bleeding from the eyes. He stepped back, wrote, unknown precursor, attempted balance, incomplete. The ledger wrote in response, failed scribe, then listed a name he didn't recognize. Roland Iska. He checked the older page. Roland Iska had written 7 names, all in the same year, then stopped. No further entries, no judgment recorded. Thane stood in the ruins until night fell. The stars over the camp were the wrong pattern, not misaligned, rewritten as if someone had once paid to change which constellations define the season. That kind of debt wasn't personal, it was cosmic. Back in the tent he found that no one looked him in the eye. The tavern was quieter than before. He ordered nothing, sat, unrolled the ledger, wrote Roland Iska's name on a fresh page, added the note, balance incomplete, echo remains. The page turned, a second name appeared, Thane, scribe. The ink didn't pulse, it stared. He didn't touch the quill again that night. In the morning, he walked to the center point on the map, found a hill of stone carved into geometric patterns too old to be symbols and too new to be coincidence. In the center was a cavity, not a grave, a seat. He didn't sit. He placed the ledger on it. The stone pulsed. He stepped back, waited. Nothing changed, but when he picked the book up again, its spine had new ridges, small, carved numbers. His own, 10 of them, one for each major correction he had completed. The book was counting. He walked away, returned to the camp, didn't speak, didn't write. That night, someone knocked on his door. A girl, no older than 12, holding a broken spiral etched on glass. It wants you to know, she said. You're almost halfway. He asked. Half of what? She smiled. Didn't answer. Handed him the glass. Walked into the darkness. He added a new page to the ledger. Titled it, The Debt I Owe. Left it blank. For now, the ledger closed itself, and didn't open for 3 days. He moved east through the shallow hills that divided trade from territory, leaving behind the nameless camp with its broken spiral, the seat and the stone, and the girl who vanished into the dark with no trace but a phrase that still rang in his head. You're almost halfway. The ledger had not opened in 3 days, nor had it responded to his questions, taps, or even when he traced his name with the quill just beside the margin. He hadn't dared write it directly yet. Some boundary held, whether his or the book. He walked in silence, stopping only to eat dried root and mark old border stones with symbols from memory. The road turned sour after the 4th day. Trees leaned too close over the path. The sky lost color without losing light. The birds didn't call and the bugs droned with too perfect a rhythm. When he entered the outskirts of Fenest Hollow, he found it too quiet for a town that hosted 3 intersecting roads. The homes were intact. The roads swept, but no voices echoed from the windows. Doors were closed, shutters barred, signs flipped to close that had no hinges. He paused at the well in the center square, looked down, saw his own reflection moving slower than his face. He whispered the word debt, and the water stilled completely. The ledger opened, not fast, not dramatic, just a clean fold as if it had never been shut. A blank page, waiting. He wrote Fenest Hollow as a header. The ink turned silver, then black, then silver again. A second page turned, this one already filled. Names scrawled in a different hand, older, sharper, dozens of them, all stamped with the same phrase, paid in silence. He He touched one. The ink pulsed warm. Not threatening, welcoming. He added a mark beside it. Confirmed. The page shifted. The name lifted slightly off the parchment as if breathing. He closed the book, walked through the town. Each house he passed had a name etched into the outer wall, near the base, too low to notice unless you were looking. Not family names, not personal ones, just first names, followed by a number. Orwal, 2, Mika, 5, Donnet, 9. He counted 27 before stopping. No name was duplicated, no number repeated. A house with no name at all had been scorched black around the doorframe. Not burned, rejected. He knocked once, no answer. Pushed the door. It opened into a room full of bookshelves and candle stubs. No dust. A ledger of its own lay on the table, not like his. This one was mortal. Paper, string-bound, handwritten. He flipped it open. It held records of trade, time, conversation. A line at the top said debt spoken as debt held. He copied it, added it to his ledger's margin, closed the house door when he left. At dusk he returned to the center well, sat on its stone lip and waited. No one approached. But after an hour, a bell rang from a tower he hadn't seen. A short tone, flat, then silence. He stood, the ledger flipped open again. New page, one word, listen. He held his breath. The wind moved once. Then a voice, not heard but present, said, "Balance came here once. It stayed. We remember. Do not rewrite what already holds." He whispered, "I won't." The page flipped shut. He slept in the square. In the morning a basket of bread and dried figs waited beside him. No note. He ate one piece, left the rest. Wrote acknowledged at the end of the Fenest Hollow entry. Moved on. 3 days northeast and the terrain changed. Hills became cliffs. Villages turned into ruins. One stood half buried in glass, the result of an old spell war. He didn't enter. He marked it in the ledger. Obliterated balance. Leave untouched. The page accepted it with no response. He descended into a canyon town called Harriet's Bend. A bowl of stone carved by old rivers, now redirected, where the people lived in shadow and drew light from shard lanterns. Here, the debt was thick. He smelled it. Each step felt resisted, not magically, philosophically, as if the town owed the ground something, and it wasn't done paying. He stayed in a cave hostel near the lower ring shared with the weaver, whose eyes never focused, and a man who kept whispering, "It wasn't me," even when asleep. The ledger opened without prompt on the second night. A name, Neldra Harith. He asked aloud, "Founder." The ink shifted. New page, instigator. Then a list of descendants. One of them, Lorth Harith, unbalanced. He asked for location. The page bled slightly, then dried. He followed. Lorth lived in the upper ridge, in a home carved into the cliff, guarded by glyphs that hummed when stared at. He waited outside for hours. When the door opened, Lorth stepped out with a blade in his hand, and no shadow on the ground. "You're the one," he. Thane didn't answer. They said someone would come. Thane held up the ledger. "Your family owes," Lorth sneered. "Everyone owes. That's why no one gets paid." He threw the blade. Thane didn't move. The ledger absorbed it mid-flight, pulled it between pages and closed. Lorth paled. "That was bonded." Thane nodded. "So is this." Lorth didn't fight again. He walked into his house and never returned. The town changed. One street realigned. A tower that had always leaned began to stand straight. No one noticed, but Thane marked it. The ledger approved. By the end of the week, Harriet's Bend had shifted from a place of resistance, a place of quiet. That meant it was time to leave. He didn't say goodbye. He never did. The ledger only hummed once, as he walked out, as if to say, "That's 11." He moved faster now. The next city on his path was large, named Treneth, a river port with black ships and red sails. Trade here was thick, legal and not. The ledger didn't open for 2 days. He waited, listened, recorded. Then, one night in a tavern where the wine never dulled and the food tasted better than memory, the ledger spilled 3 names at once. Varn Corval, ledger thief. Linsa Darn, false seer. Parnell Thorn, unearned title. Thane wrote no actions. The names stayed. He followed Varn first, found him in a warehouse, counting crates of dried flux spice. Watched him adjust a document, sign his name, then erase it with a whisper. That was ledger magic, not his kind. A rival. Thane confronted him in the street, said only, "That's not your balance." Varn blinked, pulled a coin, spoke a command. Thane raised the ledger, the coin cracked. Varn screamed, not in pain, in revelation. "I was never owed," then ran. He didn't get far. His shadow peeled off his feet and ran the other direction. He collapsed, mindless. Linsa Darn had a tent near the east docks. Told futures for coin, but her visions always ended in doom, unless paid double. She saw Thane and said, "Your death has already been traded." He said, "Then collect." She screamed and fell back. The tent tore itself down around her. The wind didn't stop for a full minute. When it did, she was gone. Parnell Thorne was harder. He held a seat on the city council, carried no debt in public, but the ledger said otherwise. Thane approached him in a public garden. Ledger open. "You took the name of a better man," he said. Parnell stood still. "That name was for my brother. He died for it," Thane said. "So it was paid. It wasn't yours to spend." The ledger opened wide. A spiral formed on the grass. Parnell stepped into it, said nothing, was never seen again. Trent Sid's ship stopped docking 2 days later. Rumors of wrong tides. Dead wind. The river whispered new names. Thane walked north. The ledger marked the count. 12. The pages grew heavier. He carried them without struggle. Still hadn't written his own name. But now, some pages bore his handwriting in forms he didn't remember. That was fine. It meant the ledger had begun helping. Or thinking. He wasn't sure if there was a difference. The next name that appeared came with no date, no title, no context. Just 3 words beneath it. The one before, the name was written in gray. He couldn't read it, not with his eye, but the ledger did. The page turned. His hand wrote by itself. A single phrase. "We are not done." Then it shut, and did not open again. Not for a very, very long time. He wandered for 3 weeks without speaking a word aloud. The ledger remained closed, the entire time, and Thane didn't try to open it. It didn't feel like waiting. It felt like the silence between steps in a procession that had already decided where it was going. He passed through 3 villages and left no trace, walked roads still wet from rain that had no clouds, and slept beneath trees that remembered a different age. His meals were simple: root bread, dried fig, water purified through runes he barely glanced at anymore. The world adjusted for him now. When he walked into towns, guards looked twice but said nothing. When he lingered near borders, papers approved themselves. When he asked questions, answers came from people who didn't remember speaking. This wasn't power, it was gravity. The ledger had weight now, enough that the world leaned toward him without asking why. On the 22nd day he arrived at the outskirts of Orphan Vale, a city built on terraces above a river that never stayed in its bed. The waters had carved the rock so many times that the city changed shape every decade, rebuilding on top of its own history, layer by layer, until no one could say for sure where the original foundation had been. That made it perfect. A city built on forgetfulness, a structure that could be rewritten without noticing. He checked into a small room carved into the 3rd-tier wall, paid with a coin older than the kingdom's charter, and walked the streets without a destination. The people were tired but alert, civil but guarded. Every shopkeeper had a mirror behind them. Every alley had a watcher that vanished when stared at. Thane didn't question it, he just kept walking. That night, the ledger opened. No prompting, no signal, just a clean, slow opening like a door remembering how to move. 1 page, 1 name, Kel Rosanne, beneath it. The split architect, debt suspended. That word suspended made Ken sit up straighter. He had encountered overdue, denied, inverted, voided, overridden, and multiplied. Never suspended. He ran his fingers over the ink. It was colder than the page. The ledger turned itself. Showed a map, not geographic, conceptual, a series of lines and dots, not roads or buildings, but movements, flow paths, weight transfer, a pattern of influence, drawn like a schematic. In the center, a spiral, slightly misshapen. Thane whispered, "You want me to repair it?" The ledger didn't respond, but the ink darkened slightly. He understood something about Kel Rosanne's actions had started a correction, and then stopped mid-process. Whatever was left undone had continued to echo. That was dangerous. Corrections half finished didn't stay still. They grew strange. He spent the next 4 days locating mentions of Kel Rosanne. City records had nothing. Private ledgers carried the name like a rumor, always tied to misfortunes. No one could explain. A well that changed depth each day. A street that moved half an inch during fog. A widow who claimed her husband returned every night in a different face. All trivial, all tolerated. But each linked to the same section of the upper terrace, near a sunken courtyard overgrown with moss. When Thane visited it, the ledger grew warm in his coat. He stood in the center, said nothing. The moss shifted beneath his feet. He knelt, scraped away the green, found a symbol. Not a spiral, a loop broken at one edge. a correction that never closed. He placed the ledger on it, waited. The book opened. A new page formed. It contained no name, only instructions. Step 1, speak the unspoken debt. Step 2, witness the false return. Step 3, balance with refusal. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew it wasn't a request. He left the courtyard, waited until night, returned. No one followed. No one watched. He sat where the moss had shifted, opened the ledger, read the instructions again. Spoke aloud. Kel Rosang, you owe this place what you never took. The air grew dense. Not colder, just heavier. A figure appeared at the edge of the stonework. No footsteps, no breath, no shadow. A face he didn't recognize, shifting slightly between expressions like it couldn't settle. The figure stepped forward, said nothing, then opened the book, pointed. Your debt was suspended. I am the resumption. The figure reached for the ledger. Its hand stopped an inch from the page. Burned. It didn't scream. It only stepped back. Then it began to speak in 3 voices. One pleading, one cursing, one laughing. The words made no sense. Not to the ear, but the meaning was clear. I never finished. I was broken, before I could betray. Then said. But the result was the same. The voices said. Then deny me. He understood then what the 3rd step meant. Balance with refusal. Not to fix, to reject. He stood, closed the ledger, spoke clearly. You are not owed closure. The figure collapsed into dust. No scream, no sound, just weight, falling. The moss retracted. The stone cracked. The loop completed. The ledger opened again. A new name appeared. Kelros, undenied. And the city began to breathe. Subtly. The fog lifted faster. The next day, streets felt more aligned. A merchant then had passed 5 times finally nodded at him. Orvanvel didn't know what had happened, but it responded. He left that night, didn't sleep, didn't eat, walked for 2 days straight until his feet bled, and the ledger flipped itself to a blank page. He knelt beneath an oak that had been struck by lightning and still lived, wrote a phrase without thinking. How many more? The ledger answered with a number, 12, then crossed it out, replaced it with the symbol for infinity, then turned the page, presented a new name, the Drowned Kingdom. No person, no location, just the title. He wrote define. The ledger responded, they forgot their, so the world remembered it for them. He stared at the page, then closed the book, didn't open it again, until he reached the shore 5 days later, where no maps had recorded a sea, and yet the water waited anyway. The shore was lined with bones, not human, not long vertebrae like bridges curled through black sand, their ends splintered as if something massive had once chewed them apart from the inside. The water that lapped at the edge was not oceanic, nor river-borne. It was quiet, unnaturally still, dark without reflection, and cold without weather. Thane stood at the edge with the ledger pressed against his ribs beneath his coat, staring at the horizon, where no sky met no sun. There were no birds, no boats, no driftwood, only the implication of depth. The ledger hadn't opened since it gave the title, The Drowned Kingdom. Now it burned against his side, as if the leather were heating from inside. He crouched, touched the surface of the water, and the temperature rushed into his veins like a name he hadn't spoken in decades. The ledger opened. 1 page, no names, just a phrase. They gave what was never there, collected what was never owed. Balance demands submersion. He stood, took 5 steps into the water. It didn't rise, didn't ripple, but each step felt heavier. Not his body, his presence. The farther he moved, the more the world remembered him, and not kindly. By the 10th step he heard whispers, not in his ears but in his mouth, echoing backward through every sentence he'd ever spoken aloud. The ledger floated in front of him, unsupported. The page turned. 1 line. Write nothing. Listen. He did. The water spoke in silence. Stories he couldn't parse, debts he didn't understand, promises made between dead things and old winds. He saw a tower sink brick by brick with no one inside it, saw a crown made of teeth passed from father to son, with hands that trembled, saw a woman carve an oath into her spine and drown herself to make it permanent. These weren't dreams, they were memories, not his, not the ledger's, the kingdom's. He was witnessing what they'd buried to keep breathing. He turned slowly, looking out across the endless flatness of the sea. Then, as if his gaze mattered, the sea peeled, not opened, not parted, peeled like fabric unraveling in perfect geometric sequence. Behind it, a city, vast and ruined, suspended beneath the surface like a breath held too long. No fish swam between its towers, no moss grew on its spires. Everything was intact, and everything was waiting. Then stepped forward. The sea offered no resistance. He walked down into the kingdom like descending stairs made of memory. The light dimmed, but not because of depth. He passed buildings without doors, windows filled with ash. Murals still colored the walls, depicting people whose eyes had been painted last. Every face bore the same expression, relief. Not joy, not triumph, relief like the end of a debt. He stopped before a plaza of concentric rings. In the center, a pedestal. Upon it, a bowl, empty. He opened the ledger. It flipped itself to a page filled with names. No other text, just names. Hundreds, thousands. More than the pages could contain, yet they didn't run off the edge. The ink shifted with his breath. He touched one at random. The page shuddered. The water above rippled. A crack appeared in one of the murals. He touched another. This time the pedestal cracked. The bowl trembled. The ledger wrote a sentence. To balance what never belonged, you must pay with silence. He stood still, then said, I refuse. The plaza groaned. Stone shifted. The pedestal began to sink. The bowl shattered. The mural faces changed. Now they looked at him. The ledger turned a page. Good. Thane stood as the city twisted. Buildings unrooted. Streets realigned. The water no longer held pressure. Gravity returned. He sank 2 feet. Staggered. The ledger closed, then reopened with a new header. The unburial process. He was no longer a visitor. He was the mechanism. He wrote a single phrase. The drowned kingdom remembers. The ink spread across 10 pages. The sea above closed again, but the pressure stayed gone. The city wrote, not physically, conceptually. When he returned to the shore, the bones were gone, the sand was white, and people waited. 4 of them, faces blank, not unaware, but expectant. One of them stepped forward. A woman in gray. You brought it back, she said. I did, Thane replied. She opened her mouth to speak again, then stopped. Looked down. Her shadow stretched toward him, not hers. It climbed her body and entered her eyes. She blinked, nodded, stepped aside. The others followed. He didn't ask names. They had already been recorded. He walked past it, left the shore. The sea stayed. It would never vanish again. The world now had to remember. The ledger added a tally mark. No number, just a spiral. Then turned to a page that had no edge, and began writing without his hand. He moved inland, away from the sea that was not on any map, carrying with him the silence of a kingdom that had been forced to remember itself. The ledger weighed heavier now, not physically, but conceptually. As if with each correction it pulled more of the world into alignment and tethered that alignment to him. Every mile from the shore, the land felt different, more precise. Trees no longer grew in haphazard pattern. Roads met at clean angles. Rivers bent with a logic he hadn't noticed before. As if the ledger's influence reached not just people but geography itself, reasserting an order long buried. Villages along his path seemed cleaner, more orderly, more polite, but that wasn't comfort, it was tension, the kind that came from a world unsure if its current peace was deserved. People looked at him like a storm they had dreamed of. Children fell silent when he passed. Animals didn't growl or flee. They simply turned away. He reached the town of Hestrin at dusk, a trade hub along a line of caravans that hadn't moved in days. Every wagon was parked in a circle around the main square, as if barricading something in or keeping something out. When he asked the tavern keeper what had happened, she only said, no one leaves, not since the well stopped echoing. He paid for a room, sat alone, opened the ledger. It turned without prompt, a page already full. Header, Hestrin, debt misplaced. The list beneath contained no name, just entries like first trust, final baptism, silence oath, last grain. He flipped back, found a diagram, not of a city, of a ritual, one that began at the well and spiraled outward through 7 structures. If left uncorrected, the debt wouldn't grow. It would repeat, cycling endlessly, burying the town in echoed consequence. He left the room, walked to the well. No guards, no lights, but a presence, unmistakable. The air shifted with his breath. The stone was warm. The echo they spoke of wasn't sound. It was history. He dropped a single copper coin and heard nothing. Opened the ledger. Wrote. Echo withheld. The ink turned blue, then gray, then vanished. The page rippled. The well trembled. A shape rose, not a person, not even a form, just a presence. The ledger flipped itself violently. A page tore. A word appeared. You. Then another. Oh. He stood still, reached for the quill, wrote. Oh, what? The ledger responded. Their forgetting was borrowed. You must repay in memory. He staggered back. The presence from the well followed, not moving, just staying close, like shadow. He asked, what happens if I refuse? The ledger wrote, then it never ends. He breathed, closed the book, walked back to his room, slept. In the morning, no one met his eyes, not even the children. He walked through the town with the presence still following, still invisible. He passed the 7 sites marked in the diagram: shrine, granary, library, watchhouse, bath, bell and market. At each one he paused, said nothing. The air grew colder, the presence grew sharper. At the market, he stopped, said aloud, you tried to erase what was owed. The ground cracked, the carts outside shifted. A man shouted in his sleep. The ledger opened. Final page of the entry, restore the memory, or take it. He chose. He walked to the shrine, lit a candle, spoke no prayer, just whispered names, any names, ones he'd passed, ones from old pages. The flame bent, the walls shuddered. He moved to the granary, scratched a spiral into the wood. The door slammed shut behind him. He stood in darkness. Then the grain shifted, not downward, backward. Old sacks returned. He saw names etched into the burlap, ones long paid, ones long forgotten. At the library, he read aloud the opening lines of a book with no ink. The letters burned into the page. The bath turned black, then clean. The bell rang itself. The market shut. By the time he returned to the well, the town had gathered, silent, watching. They didn't understand, but they felt it. He opened the ledger, wrote, debt returned. The ink held, no change, no glow, just acceptance. The presence vanished. The air cleared. The well echoed again, not loudly, just enough to remind. He left Hestrin at dawn. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. That was fine. Thanks weren't balance. 3 days later, the ledger opened again. A new page. No title, no border, just a single line. You've rewritten 27 debts. How many were yours? He didn't answer. The next town was already waiting, and it didn't have a name, only a question. The unnamed town sat in the hollow of a dead valley, surrounded by hills so uniform in slope and distance that Dan knew they had not formed naturally. They were boundaries deliberate, artificial, placed long ago to encircle something the world no longer wanted to find. The buildings were plain stone, smoothed over by time and wind, their edges worn but not crumbling. Doors had no handles, windows had no shutters, streets bore no names, and every structure looked almost identical save for minute variations in angle and width, like a city designed by someone who believed names were lies and symmetry was the only truth. No people moved about, no animals, no wind. The moment Thane passed through the 4th hill into the inner basin, sound dulled, not silenced, dampened, like the air remembered what it meant to be silent and enforced it out of habit. The ledger, which had remained dormant since Hestrin, vibrated faintly beneath his coat, not with urgency but with caution. He stopped at what might have once been the town square, though no marker signified it. There, at the center of 4 intersecting roads, stood a stone pedestal, not high, not ornate, no plaque, only a sloped platform wide enough to place a book. Thane approached, laid the ledger down. It opened without his touch. The page turned slowly. There were no names, just a phrase, this is the place where names were broken. Then beneath it smaller, debt without identity is the deepest wound. He stepped back, closed his eyes, listened. No burp, no footsteps, no echoes. But beneath the silence, something moved. Not physically. Conceptually, a pressure of recognition, like the world itself acknowledged his arrival, without ceremony. He walked clockwise around the pedestal, counting steps. 48. Stopped. Turned. Walked again. 49. Turned. Walked again. 47. Each path changed. The space moved as he walked it, adjusting its angles like a breathing thing, bending reality to ensure no route repeated. He understood then what kind of debt this place held. Not stolen coin, not broken vows, not betrayed God. This town had erased itself. It had refused to exist, and demanded that the world obey. But the cost had not vanished, it had accrued interest in absence. He opened the ledger again, wrote, unknown town, debt of erasure. The ink bled into the page, spreading beyond the line, forming abstract spirals that did not align to any known rune. He flipped to the next page, the ledger resisted. Pages grew stiff. He forced it. The book let out a sound not a whisper, not a hum, but a sharp intake of breath. The new page held a single name, Nimenth. Beneath it, we do not remember, but we still owe, Fen. Wrote the name again. No surname, no lineage. Just Nimanth. The ink froze, then shattered. Tiny shards of black flaked off the page. He wrote again, this time, smaller. Balance me against the forgotten. The stone pedestal shifted. A crack appeared along its base. A low thrum echoed through the buildings. Doors opened. Slowly, without touch, figures emerged. Human-shaped, blurred. Their features unfinished, like sketches never completed. They walked without moving their legs, their presence stitched into the space itself. One of them stopped before him. Stared. No eyes, no face, just attention. Then, said, "You chose to vanish." The figure did not nod, did not breathe, but the space around it darkened. Another stepped forward. The air grew thicker. The third came, and the silence screamed, not audibly. Historically, he reached for the ledger, flipped 3 pages back, found a blank space he'd always ignored. Wrote one word, witness. The figures halted. The stone pedestal flared with dull light. A wind moved through the town, finally, and the hills surrounding them shivered, as if realizing they had been guardians of a lie. Fen turned a page. The ledger did not resist. It showed him what the town had done. Not a story, not an image, a sequence, a choice made once and repeated infinitely. Each time the town committed an atrocity in its founding, it had erased it, layered another memory, rewritten another past. Over time, those rewrites accumulated until no one remembered what had been real. The result was stability, order, peace, but the cost was truth, and the truth, denied long enough, had become debt. A debt no one living remembered how to pay. He closed the book, addressed the figures. "Do you want to exist?" No reply. He waited. Then one figure stepped forward, raised its hand, pointed to the pedestal. Fen placed the ledger back, wrote, "Name yourselves." Nothing happened. He added, "If not yours, then someone else's." The pedestal cracked open. A voice spilled out. Female. Calm. Unforgiving. "We remember the crime, but not the hands." Fen nodded. Then, "I'll take them." He opened a fresh page, wrote, "Neman. Crime unknown. Consequences unpaid. I accept the imbalance." The page burst into flame. No heat, just light. A spiral formed in its place. The town breathed. Windows lit. Streets aligned. The figures blurred, then solidified. Human. Whole. Eyes wet with memory. They didn't fall to their knees. They didn't weep. They just stood. Fen turned, walked out of the town, never looked back. The ledger marked the event not with a number, not with a name, but a glyph that hadn't been seen since the age of first deaths. The symbol of assumed burden. He bore it without complaint, because that was balance, and balance was the only thing he sought. The hills that had once surrounded the forgotten town no longer sloped uniformly behind him. Their curvature had broken, as if something deep beneath them had shifted in response to the ledger's acceptance of their debt. Fen felt it in the dirt, the irregularity of each footstep betraying a land that no longer moved in perfect circles. He didn't pause to reflect. He didn't catalog the shift. He only walked. A new pressure had settled across the world, a pressure not of resistance, but of expectation, the kind of hush that precedes judgment. The ledger had not opened since Nani's name had been burned into a spiral, and Fen didn't force it. When it opened again, it would do so for something that truly needed rebalancing, not these passive echoes of once closed wound. He passed 2 border stones, split by unknown lightning, followed by a broken riverbed where moss grew up instead of down. These were signs of imbalance lingering long after correction. Not his responsibility, not yet. By the end of the second day he arrived at the outskirts of a city he'd never seen written on any official map but had heard, whispered in caravan tongues and broken contracts. The Purkun, a city of ink and teeth, where scribes ruled with authority drawn from centuries of contractual dominance. It wasn't just a place of law, it was a place where agreement itself had taken root, grown roots, and bloomed into a living, breathing organism that people mistook for society. Here, every action was preordained by the signatures that permitted them, and every building's foundation was signed by hands long dead, enforced by bureaucratic lineage. The streets were wide, not for beauty or grandeur, but to accommodate the dozens of pathways necessary for various levels of authorized passage. To walk a central road without a Class 1 transit scroll was to invite erasure from all public records. He didn't need permission. He had the ledger, and the ledger overruled permission by weight alone. He stepped onto the road. No alarm sounded. No ghost bailiff descended to drag him into the black halls. But the people around him stopped walking. Not in fear, in confusion, as if his very presence invalidated the contracts that held their feet in motion. He walked straight down the main corridor, passed under arches built from old decrees and sigils, reinforced with gold leaf legality, reached the Hall of Initial Records, where every action ever permitted by the city had been copied, verified, and stored. Guards stood on either side, their mouths sewn shut, their ears sealed beneath glass domes. They didn't react, they didn't have to. The building recognized him. The door opened. Inside, silence thickened. Not forced, not magical, just absolute. He moved through aisles lined with scrolls that screamed only when unrolled. The ledger in his coat opened. Unprompted, pages flipped without noise. A blank page revealed a title he hadn't written. Vulcrin, the signature of lies. Below that, only one name, Irand. Beneath that, signatory prime, debt, consent, theft. He paused, closed the book, sat in the nearest chair. It was uncomfortable, hard, designed to be occupied only by those willing to suffer for knowledge. He waited, listened. Nothing. Then the scrolls began to unroll themselves, their ends flaring with embers, revealing lines of contracts written in bloodless ink. Everyone bore Irandvul's name. Everyone signed after the subject had died. Posthumous authorization, retroactive consent, agreements manufactured to legalize injustice. The ledger turned a page, showed him how many signatures had been forged. 1,427. He stood, walked deeper into the archive, passed beneath a banner that read, "Consent is the foundation of civilization," pushed through the door behind it, and entered the chamber of signatories. In the center stood a figure, cloaked, masked, breathing the law like air. Thane spoke first. "You stole agreement from the dead." The figure replied. They could not object. Thane opened the ledger. "That is not the same as permission." The figure turned, mask etched with a smile. "In Vulcrin, it is." Thane wrote a sentence. Irandvul consent debt. Invalid contracts. The ledger pulsed once. The floor cracked. The scrolls howled. The mask shattered. Beneath it, no face, only a swirling knot of sigils feeding each other. He stepped forward. "You are not a person." The knot replied, "I am a function. A legal result, created by recursive agreement. To erase me would be to erase the laws themselves." Thane did not hesitate. He wrote, "Erase." The knot imploded, the room went silent. The scrolls burned. Every signature within the archives turned to ash. Outside, the city paused. Contracts stopped enforcing themselves. Roads merged. Buildings twisted slightly. The weight of obligation lifted. The people looked up, and for the first time in memory, decided for themselves where to walk. He left through a door that had never existed, formed by necessity alone. The ledger closed, marked the correction with a stamp he'd never seen. A single pen, snapped in half, surrounded by a spiral. Balance was not permission. It was choice. And choice, once returned, did not require validation. He walked west into the red hills. The ledger grew quiet, but in the distance he saw a tower flicker in and out of existence. One the book had never recorded. That meant it was next. That meant it was wrong. That meant it was his. The tower wasn't visible at first glance. Not unless you stared at the exact point on the horizon where the hills broke their own slope, where the red clay split into slivers that caught the sun at angles no sun had any right to reach. When Thane stood at the ridge and blinked twice, it appeared not as a solid form, but as a distortion, a vertical contradiction that bent the air around it. It didn't shimmer, it held an anchor, not metaphorical, not magical. Something older, built before either term had currency. He didn't approach immediately. He sat on the edge of the ridge and waited for the ledger to open. It didn't. He opened it himself. The page resisted. He turned it anyway. There was no heading, no name, just a line carved, not with ink but with pressure. "Do not correct what is still being written." He stared at it, said aloud, "Then why show it to me?" The page absorbed the sound, turned blank again, and flipped itself to a spread of diagrams, none of which followed geometry he recognized. Spirals intersected triangles that folded into spheres, lines bent through other pages as if refusing to remain flat. He reached forward, touched the center of the largest diagram. The tower pulsed in his vision, once, twice, then resolved. He stood, began walking. The land didn't change, his perception did. Each step brought him closer, but not by distance, by relevance. The further he walked, the more the tower began to matter. He remembered places he had never visited, people he hadn't written, debts that felt familiar but weren't in the ledger. The tower was not a correction, it was an origin. By the time he reached its base, the world behind him had quieted. Not with silence, with compliance. The ledger remained open to the same blank page, now glowing faintly. The door to the tower stood open. No lock, no guard, just an arch of stone shaped like a book, split down the spine. He entered. The interior was wider than the base. The space refused consistency. Walls shifted when he didn't look. Stairs bent upward, downward, and sometimes both. The air carried the scent of old wax and burnt memory. No dust, no echoes. At the center of the chamber, a desk, on it, another ledger. Smaller, bound in white thread, no markings on the cover. He approached, reached for it. The room stopped him. Not physically, not magically. He knew if he touched that book, something would change that could not be changed back. The ledger at his side flipped a single page. Wrote one line. "This is your ledger, Thane." He didn't ask how it knew. He opened the smaller book. Blank pages, all of them. But when he touched one, ink crawled out from the spine, forming a name he hadn't written in decades. His brother's, a debt he had thought buried. Not one of blood, one of silence. He had known, had done nothing. Let the man be consumed by a system that didn't see him. That name sat at the center of the page, unjudged, unbalanced. Thane touched it. The ink didn't move. He closed the book. The room shifted. A second desk appeared. This one empty, waiting. He opened the ledger again. The real one. The black one. The weight. Wrote, "I acknowledge my personal imbalance." The room darkened. The tower groaned. A spiral appeared on the floor beneath his feet, etched in fire that did not burn. One by one, voices rose. Not shouting, stating. Every name he had ever written spoke in unison. Each reciting their debt, their correction, their acceptance. It should have been overwhelming. It wasn't. It was truth, folded into the air like iron filings into a magnetic line. Then one voice said, "You never wrote me." He turned. A man stood by the door. Tall, unarmed, familiar in a way that made his lungs tighten. "I was the first," the man said. Thane's hand went to the ledger. "Stop. I don't remember you. You chose not to." The man stepped forward. "I made the ledger." Thane didn't move. "No one made the ledger." The man smiled. "No. They only maintained it. I began it. With your name." The tower shook. The desk split. The white ledger fell to the ground. Thane stepped back. The other man advanced. "You think balance is judgment? It isn't. It's repetition." He pulled out a second book. Identical. Except for one difference. The cover bore Thane's full name. "You've been here before," the man said. "This is not your first cycle. This is not your first ledger. Every time you reach this tower, you write your name and the world ends. Then starts again." Thane whispered. "Why?" "Because the ledger cannot exist without contradiction." The fire spiral flared. Thane looked at the book. The white one. The blank one. He reached down, touched it. It opened. One page. Already filled. One name. His lied with a note. Corrected. Denied. Corrected again. The page turned itself. Blank. Waiting. The tower rumbled. The air filled with heat. The other man smiled. "Choose. Start again, or end it." Thane stood still. Opened the black ledger. Wrote one line. "I refuse recursion." The white book caught flame. The other man screamed. Not in pain. In failure. The tower cracked. The spiral collapsed. And the ledger turned to its final page. Thane wrote nothing. He didn't need to. Balance had been achieved. Not in correction. In rejection. He walked out of the tower. The world behind him folded, and did not unfold again. The landscape that formed in the wake of the tower's collapse bore no resemblance to anything Thane had walked through before. It was not ash. It was not ruin. It was not the scorched aftermath of some failed sorcery or divine retribution. It was simply unwritten. The sky had no color, yet it gave light. The ground had texture, but no detail. Trees stood like sculptures of memory, perfectly spaced, none too tall or bent, and no wind moved between them. Time slowed here, not in speed but in definition. There were no birds, no insects, no hymn of distant trade roads or flowing rivers. This was not a place where life lived. This was a place where meaning had paused to see what Thane would do next. The ledger was silent. Not closed, not open, just present. It hung at his side without weight, the usual hum of recognition absent. He walked, each step left no footprint. He moved not toward a destination but through implication, following the faint sense that there was something else ahead. Not a structure or figure, but a concept waiting to become a shape. As he walked, Fragments began to appear, not ruins or artifacts, but pieces of sentence, lines of dialogue half-formed and suspended in air, as if someone had tried to narrate this place and failed. When they drifted above one stone, balance must hovered across a branch. He cannot flickered near his ear before fading. These were not his words. They were attempts at prophecy denied completion. He stopped. The ground beneath him softened slightly. Not as earth softens, but as parchment resists the pen, after being overwritten too many times. He opened the ledger. Its pages remained still. He turned one rank, another, blank. On the third page a mark, not ink. A tear. Small, neat, surgical. He stared at it. It stared back. He pressed his thumb to the mark. The page then opened a slit like a mouth, and a voice spoke, not aloud, but into the marrow of his thoughts. There are no more debts here, only echoes. He wrote one word, why? The page folded itself shut. He stood alone again. Then the sky darkened, not with storm, with form. Letters began to appear above him, massive, slow, deliberate. They etched themselves into the gray above, like commandments inscribed on air. The final debtor has been located. He wrote immediately. Name? The sky responded with a glyph he didn't understand. The ledger translated it instantly. His own name, not as thine, not as scribe, as origin. He whispered, I didn't start this. The ledger bled ink. One page turned to black. The text read, you inherited a broken system, and made it consistent. That is creation. He sat. There was nowhere to sit. Still, he sat. Beneath him, the page formed a surface that had not existed, shaped by his will. A shape appeared across the field of silence, tall, clad in symbols, no face, just a mirrored mask that reflected not light, but understanding. It moved, without haste. Each step rewrote the ground beneath it, and as it walked, the world around it became more solid. Detail returned to trees, wind resumed, color bled into things. It stopped before him, said nothing, raised one hand. The ledger turned a page, presented a contract. At the top, final agreement. Below it, two options. Accept primacy and continue correction. Eternally. Deny authorship and return the world to disorder. Fane read both. Said, there's a third. The figure tilted its head. The contract trembled. He wrote on the ledger's margin. Restructure balance through choice. The figure spoke. Its voice, like the weight of law breaking a stone. Choice is volatile. He stood. So is silence. The contract burned. The figure stepped back, shook once, split down the center. From within, another stepped forward. Same height, same mask, but this one knelt, offered a blank page. He took it, inserted it into the ledger. The book closed, then reopened with a sound like mountains exhaling. A new chapter began. No heading, no lines, just one phrase balanced by witness. He understood. He would no longer write correction. He would observe in balance and let the world adjust around his presence. He would exist as fulcrum, not scribe. He left the place. As he walked, the world resumed its story. Rivers reflowed, roads rejoined, names returned to map. But wherever he stepped, judgment was no longer needed. His presence carried enough weight, and the ledger finally stopped counting.